Additional aids and services are available to individuals with disabilities. To make such a request, please contact us by email, by clicking the Help tab in the PD portal, or at pdportal@tamu.edu, by phone, including Relay Texas at 1-800-441-7323, or in writing to Train PD, PD Portal Support, 4477 TAMU, College Station, Texas 77843. Both a transcript and accessible document of the content presented in this webinar can be found as resources in the course description. Click on the blue links under Course Resources in the description. When a link is clicked, a new browser window will open.
So we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to Manager Monday, Types of Listening with Dr. Rick Alvarado. My name is Wendy Christensen, and I'm your host today. I'm joined by Anne-Marie Molinari Sanders. All right, so we're about ready to get started. I'd like to go ahead and welcome our presenter, Dr. Rick Alvarado. He's been doing a series of presentations for us in Manager Monday. And just a little bit of his background, if you have not had the pleasure of hearing from him yet, Dr. Alvarado has served as an educator for 38 years and retired in August of 2020. He has served as a teacher, an assistant principal, a principal, an assistant superintendent, human resources administrator, and as the executive director of Education Service Center Region 2 in Corpus Christi. Rick has a passion for training and has trained superintendents, board members, leadership teams, and teachers. He's certified to train 7 Habits, Lone Star Governance, Evaluating and Improving Student Outcomes, and True Colors. Dr. Alvarado is an executive coach and helps his clients reach their fullest potential. And in his free time, he enjoys reading, learning about effective leadership, and the impact on the organization. So, Dr. Alvarado, we welcome you, and we are happy to have you here.
Well, thank you, Wendy, so much. So today we're going to talk about listening. And our objective for today is there are many types of listening, but we're going to discuss 5 types of listening, which I think are important as leaders in any organization, but most importantly, just as a personal skill set that you might want to consider. So a poll question. This kind of listening is most common in the workplace. A, active listening. B, critical listening. C, informational listening. D, empathetic listening, or E, appreciative listening. If you'll use the chat box to identify what you think is the most kind of listening skill in the workplace. So I've seen a lot of A's, a lot of B's, and I think I saw a C, a lot of C's and a couple of B's. Good deal. So they're all important, but the most common one in the workplace is B, critical listening. Why do you suppose that it's B, critical listening, out of all of those? Not that the rest aren't important, we don't use them, but why is B, why do you think it's the most common used in the workplace? We're listening for critical pieces of information that they're giving us. So we're using problem solving and other skill sets as well. So yes, so thank you for all of your input on those. And we'll discuss a little bit more why B is the most common, but we'll also discuss why all of these you'll use in the workplace as a leader. So listening. So what I'd like for you to do is reflect. I'm big on reflection. Think about the last time that you felt like someone was really listening to you. Identify that person and that situation. So how did it make you feel when you were talking to that person and you felt really heard? Maybe feel that they cared, okay? Valued, heard. Yeah, valued, Mario. Empowered, yeah, I love that word. Yeah, so as leaders, it's really important for us to really give our undivided attention to our employees. And I know I've sat in your chair or a similar chair as yours, and I know that you have a million things going on at one time and you're juggling a lot of balls, and sometimes it's hard to do. But I highly encourage you that because I have a belief that when someone comes to your office or stops you in the hallway to ask you a question, it's not because they want to waste your time. It's because they either want a response about something or they want a clarification about something. And the way we make people feel lasts a lifetime. Our words necessarily sometimes don't last a lifetime, but how we make them feel does last a lifetime. So a lot of times you hear bosses say, oh, yes, I have an open door policy. but yet the door is always closed. So the same type of listening, say, yes, I want to listen to your concerns, but yet when they come, sometimes we shy away from really putting things aside and really focusing on what it is that they have to say. So yes, the message I was imparting was important. Yes, Irene. So here's a wonderful quote from Harriet Lerner, and it states, "If only we listened with the same passion that we feel about being heard." I'm gonna let that sink in for a second. How does that resonate? How does this quote resonate with you? Yeah, people listen less than want to be heard. What I like to comes to my mind with this quote is when we go to a celebration of some kind and we want to share that with others, we typically have a lot of passion about what we want to say. But sometimes what happens is we don't put that exact same passion when someone else is speaking to us about whatever it is they're speaking to us about. So it's a reminder for us as leaders is that we really have to hone in on that skill to listen as passionately as when we're giving out information. Yes, we all want to be heard, but not always stop to listen. That's always so true, Andy. And active listening is an opportunity for growth. And we'll find out, we'll have a little conversation about active listening. And so you're so right. And some people are too busy thinking about what they want to say rather than listening. Yes, Irene. And all too often when we're doing that, when we're in that phase, we miss opportunities, what I call the golden nuggets, because we hear what we want to hear as opposed to truly listening and understanding and hearing the other person for what it is that they're trying to articulate to the rest of us. So why is listening an important skill? There's a lot of types of listening, and we use those 5 types of listening that we shared earlier in the poll question at different times. So one of the ways that listening is important to us, it helps us build trust with the people that we're having a relationship with. So if we're having a conversation with our employees and they're always correcting us about what we think we heard, that may be an indicator that we're not truly listening to what they're saying. The other piece is that it opens up new opportunities, new perspectives, because sometimes when I get out of my head and listen to what other people are saying, there's opportunities for me to really either enhance my craft or maybe change my perspective about whatever I thought about that, because it's really important that I listen, be a partner. And someone said earlier, two-way communication. Active listening is really listening is two-way communication. It also allows us to learn skills faster. We all can learn to be good listeners with a little thoughtfulness and some practice. Listening sometimes doesn't always come easy because the roles that you serve are high-paced roles. So that means you have to make decisions really quickly sometimes, or sometimes you have a lot of partners asking you a lot of questions. So it's sifting through all of those things, but still making sure you're getting the nuggets of information you need from them. So it helps us with good interpersonal communication skills, because we all know that we've all had conversations with people, and when it's really productive, we walk away feeling validated after that conversation. But when we felt we weren't heard, or they weren't really listening, or they were busy doing something else while we were having the conversation, we walk away sometimes thinking, well, that wasn't very valuable of my time, or that was a waste of my time. I need to find a different way. So it's really about communication skills and how effective do we want to be as communicators. So as leaders in the organizations that you lead, having effective communication skills is paramount to the success of you and of your program. I found this research interesting because it stated that people on the average only listen with around 25% efficiency. So that's not very high. So I think 75% of it is getting lost in the translation from the speaker to the listener. And so that's a lot of information that may be misinterpreted or not heard. So when I saw this research, it really caused me to reflect on, so, a lot of times I say I can multitask, but can I really multitask and be at 100% in that conversation with people? I don't think so, at least not for me. So it's really, I'm really purposeful when I was in the office that when people came to my office, I turned away from my computer and gave the person my undivided attention. But I was also honest. If I was working on something that really had a deadline that I had to meet, I would be honest with the person, tell the person, you know what? I know what you have to say is important, but right now it's not the best time for me. And I won't do you justice by giving you time to have this conversation that's so important to you. So can we schedule a time some other time and then keep that commitment? Because I think it's important that people are valued for what it is that they bring to the table. And so most people agree that effective listening is really important. However, a lot of people don't listen effectively, but they listen to respond to whatever it is that they're saying as opposed to listening effectively. And then most of us have a tendency to overestimate our listening skills and assume that we don't have to improve. However, I would venture to say that all of us have an opportunity to improve in our listening because we live in busy worlds, in a fast-paced world. And so sometimes it's stepping back a little bit from the cell phone or from the computer and really reflecting on what it is that we have to process. So, and I put there, does it sound familiar? Because I'd venture to say that some of you on this call experience the same kinds of things as well. And finally, especially at work, it puts us in a great position because I think the employees that we lead look up to us as leaders to model for them what it is, what are the expectations of that organization. So if the expectations are that we're active listeners and we're going to engage in conversation based on what the person is saying, then they engage in those same kinds of conversations, perhaps if it's the teachers in the classroom, with the students that they serve. And by really listening, you'll find yourself that you get more information about the knowledge and the context of what the person are trying to articulate. Because sometimes what happens is the visual clues, the nonverbal clues, can give us a lot of information about what they're trying to say, but they're struggling to say it. So helping them with some prompts can help them be better articulate their message. And so it's important to identify and understand the context during a conversation. And if we're typing, if someone's talking and we're typing or we're writing notes or all of those things, it may be, we may miss some pieces of information. Now, sometimes, as we'll talk about a little later in this conversation, it's important to take some notes because they're giving you a lot of facts, a lot of information. And in order for us, some of us are processors. I'm a processor. So I tell folks, I'm going to take some notes, but it doesn't mean that I'm disengaged from the conversation. It just means that's what helps me to better understand what your needs are or what we're trying to resolve or having a conversation around. So we'll talk a little bit about how sometimes note taking during a conversation is important. Now, of course, you can't always take notes because especially if you get called in the hallway or in classrooms, it's difficult, but we find strategies to help us that information. Do you know that there are several different kinds of listening? We talked about 5 in the poll question, but there are really a lot more than 5, but we're going to focus on 5 just because of time limitations. And so we're going to give you an opportunity to learn a little about the 5 types of listening that I've selected. And I know that if you master those 5 skills, your listening and your relationships will enhance because people will walk away feeling valued from your conversations. And so the different types of listening might be more or less appropriate for different situations. And we'll talk about the different types of situations when you might use a different type of listening skill set. So these are the 5. And we identified the critical thinking is one we use most in the workplace, but we also have some caveats that we use all of these and they're all important. And we'll talk about why and when we might want to consider using those. What do you think are characteristics of active listening? Yeah, responding to a question or a comment. Mental processing, yes. Eye contact, full focus. I love that. Nodding. Yeah, I love that staying in the moment because all too often, we live in this busy world and so much information is coming to us that sometimes it's hard staying in the moment. Yeah, focus on the moment, recapping what was shared. Yeah, I love that one, Shannon. Not interrupting because the tendency for a lot of us, I'll speak for myself, is a tendency to interrupt the person while they're speaking. Yeah, allow the person to fully express whatever they're trying to express. And yes, Michael, paying attention and staying focused. So yes, so all of you are experts at active listening. Yeah, so active listening simply means you're completely focused, as you all articulated. You're truly engaged in the conversation. You're paying attention. The speaker, the one you're speaking to, knows that you're engaged because someone said earlier, you're nodding and yes, Damina, you're paraphrasing what they're saying. So you're making sure that you're not misinterpreting any information that they may be giving you, and you're staying focused, as Karen said. So yeah, you're engaged in active listening you'll be giving off a range of subtle verbal and nonverbal cues. So it's really someone said the nodding, or sometimes we use or yes, I hear you, I understand. So those are all important because it helps the person to know that they're being listened to and therefore stay in the conversation with you and give you the information. Because sometimes what happens is if we're not active listening, sometimes the speaker gets those verbal clues or nonverbal clues and they begin to shut down. So you don't get all the information you need, especially if they're asking you to make a decision. You may not get all the information you need to make an appropriate decision. And then they may come back and say, well, you told me to do this, but you didn't have all the information you needed to maybe give a reaction to whatever they were saying. So for example, active listening might require stopping all other activities, as we talked about earlier, and avoiding distractions. And one of the biggest distraction is our cell phones. We put them on silent, but yet when we get a message, and sometimes we have it set up where we get an email, our screen lights up, and our tendency for some of us is to look at our phone. And so we lose eye contact with the person. And it may be at the most critical point that person is making that we break that eye contact, or we break that what I call a communion with the other person, that it distracts them. So it's sometimes a great idea to put your cell phone, face down so that you don't see it light up whenever you get a message or a text. So yeah, or checking messages on their smartwatch. Yeah. So it's all of those distractors that we have, or our computer screens. If we're sitting behind our desk and we glance at our computer screens, it sometimes takes away from the focus from whatever the person is trying to say. And sometimes they may get the impression that you're truly not engaged in what it is that they're saying. And that may be furthest from the truth, but it's just because as leaders, we have so many distractions at any one given point. So while maintaining eye contact and keeping your body towards the speaker, nodding and saying, or whatever it is that we do to make sure the person is engaged, are all important parts of active listening. And the author talked about mirroring the speaker's body language. And sometimes it's hard because sometimes we can't mirror that because the information they're sharing, or sometimes it's hard for us to connect with whatever the person is trying to articulate. So our facial expressions can send them a message that you're interested in what they're saying. And so it's really important that as in any type of listening, that we self-check our facial expressions, because if we're not liking what the person is saying, sometimes what happens, our facial expressions give that off to the other person, and they either shut down or no longer share their perspective about that because they know that you're not in agreement with that. And that's not the purpose of two-way communication. It's about allowing the other person to express their perspective, and then we can have a conversation about whatever it is that we agree with or don't disagree with. And so, yeah, so it also sends, as Irene said, that we don't have the time to listen to them. And we know that the most damaging part of a conversation is when the person feels disrespected by not being heard. So yeah, this is what critical thinking involves. Sometimes people call it as evaluative listening, when you're evaluating what the person is saying and try to put it in places where we make sense to us. But it helps us to problem solve, because a lot of times what happens is sometimes an employee will come to us and they may say, I stepped in it. And sometimes a natural reaction is to get that anxiety within ourselves as a listener about, oh no, what do we do? So it's really about problem solving, analyzing the decision making. And so it's getting clarification. So when you say you stepped in it, what does that mean for you? Because what stepped in it means for me could be something very different than what the person stepping in it means, because my mind could go something to the very, spectrum that's really a bad thing, where the other person say, well, no, I didn't really go that far. And what I did was this. So yeah, so making sure that we stay open to whatever it is by asking questions. So when you're engaged in this kind of listening, your critical faculties are fully switched on. There's a heightened awareness of how we're listening and what we're listening for. We're listening for cues, because by this point, I would imagine that your employees. So when we summarize information back to them in real time, we can truly understand whether we're really understanding what the person is trying to tell us. Because if they're not, they'll say, no, that's not what I said. What I meant was whatever, and they just talked about it. So yeah, Tracy, remaining calm is very important, and really monitoring our facial expressions, because our facial expressions can be all telling, and sometimes it stops the conversation. Because then if they feel they did something wrong, sometimes people clam up for a little bit. So when we're engaged in critical listening, it's important to take notes so you can follow up on key points. So especially as the listener, if I feel that they're giving me some really critical information that may be helpful to me as I synthesize or whatever it is that I have to do after they tell me what they tell me, I always tell them, no, excuse me, let me pause you for a second, but I want to take some notes because you are giving me a lot of information. And I want to make sure that I process the information correctly. And by writing it down, it's going to help me to help us in this particular situation. So that's helpful for them because they know that you're not taking notes to be disrespectful or taking notes because you want to play a gotcha system, but you really want to help it because that's the way I process. So make sure that you're not making any assumptions about what the meaning of what you're hearing that might make you misinterpret the information. So when I write it down, I can come back and say, earlier you said that you felt that our partner felt disrespected. So I want to follow up on that. What leads you to believe that they felt disrespected? What did they do or what did they say that caused you to walk away with that? And they might sometimes say, well, they did A, B, and C, or somebody says, well, maybe disrespected was too harsh of a word. So it just helps you help them clarify what that message is. So collaborative and active critical listening. Critical listening is collaborative and active rather than passive. And so what this means is that it's going to be a two-way, as someone said earlier, it's a two-way conversation. I'm going to be asking you, the speaker, some questions just to make sure that I understand what they're saying. But I'm also going to seek clarification points because this is probably not the time just to sit there and take it all in without saying anything. You don't want to be too quick to jump into the conversation, but you want them to give you enough information that you can later on go back and paraphrase in your own words what they said, and then they'll clarify whether they did that or didn't do that, include that. So another important part of being a good critical listener is the ability to give valuable feedback, which shows you've been listening closely and are actively engaged. And so sometimes what happens is most people don't want you to solve their issues for them. What they want is someone to be able to bounce off some whatever they're struggling with and get some valuable feedback. Not criticism, but valuable feedback. Okay. So what caused you to do that in the first place? Maybe a good question to give some critical feedback, because it gets them thinking about, okay, so why did I react like that? Because now in hindsight, maybe I overreacted to that situation or to those comments. So it's about helping them through that conversation within themselves so that later on, hopefully they'll use the same skill set as they think through some things, as they're having conversations with the students that they're serving. And this is, as the last bullet says, this is the kind of listening that is most common in the workplace, because this is the place where we have wonderful opportunities to make our program, the best program, and to hone in on those conversations with our partners that we have to hone in, because we all know that sometimes if we're not keeping in tune or in touch with our partners, sometimes they begin to do the things that they feel they want to do, as opposed to our program expectation that we set forth. And I speak from experience because when I was at Region 2 and Irene was leading our program, we had conversations around making sure, and Irene is really good at this, is making sure that our partners stay true to the mission of our program, because we wanted to make sure that the students received all the benefits of the program.
Before we move on, there was a couple comments in the chat pod. I don't know if you noticed. Anne-Marie had a question. Critical listening can include critical follow-up questions, correct? This shows commitment to understanding.
Yes, and so you must have read the same article I did, Anne-Marie, because at the end of this session, we'll talk about two things, and one of them is follow-up. So how important that is. So yes, so thank you. This is just the very advanced group here, so thank y'all. So what do you think are characteristics of informational listening? So when we're listening for information, what are some of the characteristics? Yeah, that's what the title says is we're gathering information, taking notes, note taking. Yes, so it's those things. Informational listening is listening to learn. So when we're at a staff development or when we're at a meeting with the state meeting, getting some information about program guidelines, a lot of it is dispensing some information for us to go back to our own programs and implement those processes or those practices that they say are best practices. So it's important for students and then someone going through the onboarding of a new company. As you hire on new staff to your staff at your program level, it's really helping them to give them the information they need to be successful. And so informational listening is not necessarily about giving feedback or an opinion in response to what you've heard, as is the case with critical listening, but it's more of understanding and absorbing the message. So it's also, as your informational listening is hopefully, as you're working with your staff, is asking some questions. Because what happens, it helps because we all know that attention span for people is sometimes really short. So if it's something that I'm not interested in, my attention span becomes even shorter. And especially for programmatic pieces, if it's informational, I want, as a supervisor, I want to make sure that the staff is really staying honed in on this conversation because they have to go back and implement some of those things. And it avoids a lot of misunderstandings over time as we move on through the program. So as with critical listening, it's important to take notes when engaging in informational listening, because I think this helps us to remember a lot of pertinent information, but it also helps us go back, as if we're processors like I am, to go back and process. So when he said or she said this, what might that look like in our program? And so another great place to use informational listening is in an interview. When you're interviewing staff, it's a great opportunity to take notes. And of course, you tell the person that you're interviewing, during our conversation, I'm gonna take some notes because I wanna remind myself to come circle back and ask them some follow-up questions. So this way it'll alleviate some of the stress that they already are experiencing and they don't misinterpret why it is you're taking some notes. So it's a great place for you to take notes and also as you ask follow-up questions, as Anne-Marie said earlier, it allows them the opportunity to understand that, I want to work for this organization because they truly take the time to listen for understanding of what it is that I said. So they feel valued. As someone said earlier, you get validated. So empathetic listening. What do you think are characteristics of empathetic listening? Yeah, I love that, Evangelina. Showing and relate, giving feedback, emotional intelligence. Yes. Yeah, relatable. So yes. Eye contact and learning from them, awesome validation. Yeah. And a great source is any of Stephen Covey material gives you a great understanding about empathetic listening. He has the 7 Habits. He has a portion on empathetic listening and validation and understanding their emotions, which is really important part of a conversation. So empathetic listening is any kind of listening that helps you empathize with and understand someone's emotion. Now, the only caution I would offer here is don't assume that you are truly understanding the emotion that the person is experiencing. And I say that because we all experience things differently and we all interpret and synthesize things differently. And so emotion is a very fragile thing to each of us. Just like when we go to a funeral and we say, oh, I totally understand how you feel. I'm not sure we do. I know we're trying to be nice, but sometimes they can be offensive because we may not know what they feel and they get offended by that. Of course, they don't say anything because it's a funeral, but it's really about saying, things just simple. In that case, you say, know that my prayers are with you, or I'm here. I'm your lifeline if you need one. So it's really being conscientious about emotion because emotion is very personal to each of us. So essentially, putting yourself in someone's shoes as they talk and showing that you are really thinking about what it's be like for them, but not pretending that we know what they're going through because every situation is different. Oh, I love that, Jean. ask clarifying questions, and don't overwrite their story with your own. Oh, I love that, because the tendency for some of us is to do that, is to make their story our story, because we want to, what I call a one-up them. So I love that. So thank you. Saying, I can't imagine what you must be going through, but I'm here for you. I love that, Tracy. It's a much better phrase than what I use. So thank you. I'm going to have to steal that from you if you don't mind. So when engaged in empathetic listening, you might find it helps to repeat back what they've said. Of course, putting it in your own words, because no one wants just to hear what they just said. They want to know that you understood them. And sometimes when we put it in our own words, they'll tell us, yes, you get me, or you feel me. Yes, or no, that's not what I said. That's not what I meant to say. So for example, these types of responses might include, that sounds really hard. I know that you've been struggling with that for some time now. And of course, you go on with the conversation. But when you validate the person, that sounds really hard, it doesn't mean you're agreeing with them. It means that you're understanding, you're being empathetic to their experience of whatever the situation is that they're relating to you. Another one example might be, 4 years is a long time to have been caring for your elderly mother. That shows a lot of strength. And then you continue with whatever the conversation. So it validates that you've heard their emotion. You perhaps feel their emotion, but you're not taking their emotion and making it your own. You're still leaving it with them. And the last example here is, how did that make you feel when that student said, this is the best class I have ever had. I've learned so much, especially if it's with a teacher. Those are the most rewarding words a teacher can get from a student when they've been successful at something. So those are some ways that we can show empathetic listening without taking their emotion and making it ours. And this kind of listening done well can really make people feel understood and supported. And you will find that when people feel that you take great pride in making sure you listen to people and try to understand them, they'll want to come back because they value your perspective and your opinion. And these require genuine care so that they do not sound, definitely, Irene, you can't, people will really know whether it's just words you're spewing out of your mouth, or they really feel that connection, that empathetic, or the connection that you have with whatever it is that they're saying. Because if you're saying those words and you're typing on the keyboard, that I'm not sure that the intent of the message is the intent that you want to, or that you want to give, but definitely not the receiver's not going to receive that intent either. So this kind of listening done well can really make feel people understood and supported. And after all, as leaders, that's one of our main roles, is we want to make sure people feel understood and supported, because if we make them feel understood and supported, they're going to do whatever it takes to make sure the program is successful. And they will go above and beyond to making sure they're successful and the program is successful, as opposed to, checking the box, clocking in and clocking out. Some leaders have a difficult time with showing them, I hear you, Lorraine. And showing empathy doesn't come easy for all of us, because I think, in old school, when I was going to school, and I was taught from the old school that said, you never want to show your employees that you're emotionally impacted by that. So never cry in front of staff, never show emotion in front of staff. I don't subscribe to that philosophy. That's not the philosophy I prescribe to, because people need to know that you're human also, and that you connect on a personal level, especially during hard times, Roberto. They need to know that you're with them, right there with them, and you're working on their behalf to make sure that you can make those things, if there's changes required to happen, they require genuine care. And so yes, so don't be afraid to show empathy and concern for others, because I think it goes a long way as you continue on your leadership path. So appreciative listening. What do you think are characteristics of appreciative listening, and how do we do that in listening? Thanking them for their communication. Yes. Grateful, saying thank you. Using positive words. Yes. Thank you, Shannon, Andy, Jean, and Lorraine. You're right, because all too often, it's important as leaders that when we're having tough conversations with people, that after the conversation is done and they're going to walk away, that we leave them with a positive note. I know this was I know this was a difficult conversation for us to have, but I thank you for staying in the moment with this conversation. Or I know this was a difficult conversation and I thank you for giving your perspective. But let's circle back and continue this conversation. Or it could be, thank you for coming to me to share this beautiful, wonderful news about the students and what you're doing in the classroom. Because I think that just those small things that we do as leaders go a long way, and people will stay with your program. Because what we don't want in our programs is that we have a lot of turnover, because it's not helpful for our program, but it's also not helpful for our students, especially if we teach multiple sessions for those students, because our students connect. And what we know about some of our students is they need those connections because they resonate with you and you resonate with them, and they need you as their support system. So acknowledging them, as Karen alluded to, and positive and being understandable, as Claudia alluded to. Appreciative listening is a kind of listening we all do when we're listening to music we love. When sometimes we've had a hard day and we have to find that way to kind of just alleviate our stress, whether it's going for a walk, go to the gym, or sometimes put on our pods on and listening to some music that's soothing for us before we go back to the reality of what the world is presenting to us. Podcasts, listening to positive podcasts, watching something entertaining to make us laugh and kind of let us forget about the moment for a little bit. Because sometimes when we forget about the moment, it helps us re-trigger our endorphins to be able to think differently about that situation. And I like the last one, is listening to an inspiring speech. And I have a couple that I like just to listen to when time gets tough, because it's a reminder to me that there's nothing in this world that can steal my joy, my happiness, other than myself. And so those inspiring speeches remind me that, you know what, we'll get you through this. He's going to get me through this as well. So just keeping myself in a positive way and not going to get stuck in the mud, if you will. So think of the last time you found yourself nodding along or raising your hands when someone was saying something to you, or you were listening to a podcast or a speech, and how that made you feel. Because that's the memory, the image, the emotion you want to bring back when it's really a tough conversation or things aren't going as you had planned. Because it's those things that help stabilize us. Because it's easy to get caught up in that little whirlwind of everything's going wrong and all those things, and we can get caught in that wind very easily. So it's reminding, you know what, this too shall pass. Yeah, gratified and fulfilled. So it's a relaxed form of listening that is less about communicating with someone in a collaborative way than simply receiving the pleasure of encouragement from them. But sometimes we want to talk to someone not for an answer, but just because we trust and value them, and we know they're not going to judge us. So it's really about making sure that we just find that person, and your thoughts, beliefs, etc. become validated. Yeah. Appreciative listening is no less important for being a bit more passive than other forms of listening. So in appreciative listening, sometimes we just need someone to tell us, you know what, you're a good person. You're doing the best that you can given the circumstances. You're going to get through this, and how can I help you get through this? And so it's not a two-way communication where I expect an answer, but they just need to know that I'm supportive of them. It kind of coincides with empathetic listening, but it's just being, giving them, letting them know how much you value them for who they are as a person. So I know sometimes when I use this word, sometimes people get offended. It's not the word I would use, but I didn't write the article, so I'm going to use what she wrote. And so it's appreciative listening is the importance of shutting up and following up. So the author articulated that if you want to improve your listening skills, do these two things. The first one was shutting up and following up. What do you think shutting up means? Yeah, Tracy, quit talking. Don't interrupt. Not talking. Stop listening to respond. Yes. It's not listening for letting them take a breath to respond. It's really letting them get that thought through and then engage in some of those, either one of the four others, or even the fifth one of appreciative listening to respond if they need a response. 2 ears and 1 mouth. I love that. Yes. What do you think following up is about? Letting them know you heard what they said. Asking questions. Just be there for them in the moment and later too. Yeah, I love that, the later too part, Irene, because it's really about sometimes after the conversation is ended, you think of some things as you're processing. So you may want to go back and talk about, okay, so during our conversation, you mentioned A, B, and C. I want to follow up on A because I think it merits a further conversation. So can we set up a time? Or it may be an email that we send or a text message, depending on the conversation and people that we're talking to, is saying, thank you for valuing me to share that kind of information with me, because I know that it took a great deal of pride for you to come share that with me. So thank you for doing that. Because it just shows that you, as Michael said, your reassurance that life is still good. So let's talk about what the author said those two things are. To listen well, you need to give someone space to talk without interrupting them, as someone said earlier. They will let you know when they want to say something, because sometimes people come to us not because they want an answer. They just want to think through their process through their head, but they do it out loud. And then they thank you. Thank you so much for helping me process this. And you say, oh, you're welcome. And all we did was just listen. We are often so focused on what we want to say that we jump in a bit too quickly. And someone said earlier, we want to make their story our story. And I think that goes in alignment with what the author talks about, is we want to jump in too quickly. Try pausing a beat and nodding rather than jumping straight in as soon as someone trails off their conversation. And I love these two because it's a reminder for me when I'm having conversations that, I don't want to interrupt them, because right now they're in a train of thought. They're just pausing because they're processing, but it's not a pause for me to give advice or to encourage or anything. Right now, it's just there, need some time. So sometimes, if you did the old Madeline Hunter process, it was that wait time. And the wait time can really be reassuring, as Michael said, that you're truly listening to that conversation. Because that awkward silence that sometimes bothers us, it's not a bad thing most times. And then consider asking a question like, did you notice anything else? To encourage them to share more, as opposed to saying, well, what I would do is this. That question of, did you notice anything else, causes them to be reflective about what they're thinking through, and gives them perhaps maybe a different perspective, or shed some more light on their perspective. Following up after a conversation is another surefire way to let someone know you've really taken in what they've said. Sometimes I've sent a text or an email back and said, thank you for taking the time to have this conversation, because it's changed my perspective on how I thought about how to address this situation. And I get an email back from them like, it's like a wow kind of thing, like, thank you. And, so I validated them too, while they gave me an opportunity to work on some things. So work on not being afraid of the awkward silence, but use it as, oh, I love that, Farrell. Yeah. This might involve sending someone an email or a text, as we said it earlier, acknowledging what they shared with you and asking a relevant follow-up question, if it's warranted, or just letting them know you're thinking about them if it's in a personal context. Someone said earlier is letting them know that, you're available, after they get through this crisis, that you're available should they want to talk about something or process some things through you. And I'm still swirling in my head with what Farrell said, because I really love that. So next time you find yourself in a role of listener, whether it's at work or at home, try asking yourself these three questions. What type of listening should I be engaged in this conversation? Because that helps you set the frame of reference, or your mindset, if you will. And the second one is, what the person is speaking might need the most from you in that conversation. So what they're telling me, what do they need the most? Do they need to be a critical listener, appreciative listener? So what kind of listener do they need me? Because if I can determine what kind of listening they need, I can better meet their needs. What will you do to build an environment of listening within your organization? Based on these 5 perspectives that we talked about listening, what will you do to build an environment of listening within your organization? If you'll write them down someplace so that you don't forget about them. And so when you go back to your notes page, you'll say, okay, so I was going to do these things. How well am I doing that? And then the second question is, how will you model the 5 types of listening? Because we all know that for informational listening, if we all listen to and take notes, but we never do anything about that, that's all they are, notes. So we have to find a way to bring them to the forefront. And so if we took some notes, and if we synthesized, or if I focused on one of those to work on, then I want to make sure I'm doing some things over time in my practice to make sure I'm honing in on those skills. And the last reflection is, what will you do to become a better listener and give the other person your undivided attention during a conversation and not multitask during that conversation? So these are some reflective questions for your consideration as you move on after this session. And so here's the reference. She talked about, the article was how to shut up and listen, how to master the 5 types of listening. And I know that we, race through these 5 types of listening, but I think as you go back and reflect, you will help you to hone in on your skills because you do a lot of these things already. It's just a matter of honing in those skills and reminding ourselves to practice those skills. So any final thoughts or questions? So what I like to do is I like to scale, ask myself scaling questions. And so take those 5 types of listening, and on a scale from 1 to 10, scale yourself. How good am I? So 1, not so much. 10, I'm a master at this. So scale yourself, because when you scale yourself, it gives you a barometer of where are you and how much time, energy, and effort do I have to put into this to make sure I master or get better at doing that skill set. Well, thank you all for your willingness to attend these Manager Mondays and finding some nuggets of information that can make you the awesome leader that you already are, that can enhance those skill sets that you take. And thank you for all the work that you all do in your programs and the services you provide for our community members, because I know that you provide some great service based on experience. This program is near and dear to my heart.
And I do have a question from Tracy. Do you think it is a good idea to ask others how you listen? Maybe to help.
Yeah, for self-check?
Yeah.
Yes. I think that's a great idea, because I think that that's how we grow, because when we look in the mirror, we see what we see. But sometimes when other people don't see the same thing that we see. So I think that's a great question. So yes, I would highly encourage you to ask others to give you some, constructive feedback on how good of a listener you are.
Well, thank you, everybody. I appreciate you coming.
We hope you enjoyed this pre-recorded webinar. After you have passed the final test with a score of 80% or greater and have received your certificate of completion, please take a few moments to complete the course evaluation. Participant feedback helps Train PD at TCAL continue to provide high-quality professional development. To leave a course feedback, please go to the completed portion of your transcript. To do this, hover over the My Learning tab and select View Your Transcript. Click on the drop-down arrow next to the word Active and select Completed. Then, click Evaluate in the drop-down menu next to the course you just completed. Please note that your feedback is greatly appreciated.